And can I say thanks, Brian, for the children's talk. That was fantastic, particularly because it was safe. I know many years ago when I came to this Bible reading, I looked up, online for some ideas for what I could do with the kids, and there was this wonderful suggestion where you could take an extension cord, an old extension cord, and you strip the wires and you splay them, and you wrap the positive round a 3-inch nail, and then you wrap the negative round another 3-inch nail, and you push these nails, one in each end of a great big zucchini or something like that. Then you plug it in and turn the power on, and it glows green. The electrician in the congregation refused to let me try that. He said that I would probably fry myself in front of his daughter in the church, and she'd need counselling for a very long time. So I haven't done that one. I must admit it does sound dangerous, but the torch and the sock I think that works really well. So thanks for that. Transformation Sunday is a wonderful story where we see, if you look a little bit wider, that the disciples go from this conversation where Peter proclaims Jesus as the Messiah. You remember Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do you say I am?" And Peter has that wonderful moment of enlightenment, you could say, where he says, "You are God's chosen one. You are the Messiah, God's Son." And they go from that, and so straight into this story where we hear 8 days after that conversation, they go up this mountain, Jesus, James, John, and Peter. And they have this, what we have come to know as the mountaintop experience. And then straight after it, all of the gospel writers put in the same story, they connect the coming down the other side into the first ministry event, and it's where Father says, "Please heal my son. He's got this demon that throws him down and foams from the mouth and casts him into the fire. And I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they couldn't do it." And so Jesus heals the boy. But there's this interesting movement between the high points in following Christ and in some ways the low points where we don't get it right and we really struggle to do the ministry and the mission that Christ has for us. And sometimes we come to church like that. Sometimes we come expecting that, we might simply be in the presence of Jesus, our friend, who might comfort us, who might have words of encouragement. But what we get when we come here can be so much more than we bargained for. It's like the veil is drawn back and we see something of the power and the glory of God. And when that happens, maybe it doesn't happen in worship, maybe it happens in your prayer times, or maybe it happens when you're just expecting to have an ordinary encounter with somebody. And it seems to be touched by the divine. And you have that sense of, wow, the curtains have rolled back and I've seen Christ at work. We call that an epiphany. When God is revealed to us. This is the last of the Epiphany Sundays, when we read passages how God does that in different ways at different times. And this one is God revealing almost his fullness, maybe not the fullness, but his divinity through Jesus in a way that the disciples had not seen, had not quite realised. They expected to have some prayer time with Jesus. But it's like God shows up. And it's like the light being turned on in a very ordinary sock. And all of a sudden, it becomes bright and glowing, and something really quite exciting and beautiful. And that happens. And I'm hoping that you can maybe just remember a time when that has happened in your walk, in your journey. Maybe it was a mountaintop, maybe it was a retreat, maybe it was a ministry event or a time of prayer and someone was healed, or maybe you were. But those times are such an amazing blessing. They are an encouragement. In themselves, we can look back on them and still be encouraged from them because we know the closeness of God in those moments. And it's like everything about our journey in Christ is affirmed and encouraged in those times. As I was reading, one of the commentators made reference to the movie Chariots of Fire. Has everybody seen the Chariots of Fire? I think I have, but I was probably about 10 when I saw it, and so I have to confess I couldn't really remember it, and I tried to find the particular parts that were important, and so I watched some of it last night, but I couldn't get the whole movie, and so maybe if you've got a copy you could lend it to me. But the author was talking about the very final scene after the Olympics. I mean, you'll know that it's sort of two journeys of, what are their names? It is Harold Abrams and Eric Liddell, the two runners, and it follows the different journeys to the 1920 Olympics. But he was particularly interested in Harold Abrams, who wins the gold medal in the 100. That he'd worked, so much for that, and that was really his drive was to win that race, the 100 metres. And of course, Eric Liddell, who he was most competitive with and most concerned about, that he may not beat him, pulls out of the race because it's on a Sunday, and being a strong Christian, he says, no, I'm not going to run on Sunday. And so he wins the gold in the 440 yards. But Harold Abrams wins the 100, and there's this scene where he's returning to England after the Olympics in Paris, and all the athletes are pouring off the train into Waterloo Station, and after everybody else has gotten off, he gets off last, and his girlfriend is waiting for him there. And there's depicted in him is this enormous come down from the podium, literally, of winning the gold 100 metres, the thing that he'd strived for, pushed for, trained for so many years, the thing that he'd been longing for and agonising over whether he could do it or not. He has it, but he steps off the train almost and depicts the notion that, but I know I won't be standing there ever again. That was my time at the top of the mountain, on the podium, and now I come back to England to my ordinary life and what lays before me. And there's something of that in this passage of the Transfiguration. And there's something of that in our journey with Christ. We have those mountaintop experiences, yet we also have the mission and the ministry that happens as the ordinary, as the everyday life. Sometimes they're difficult, sometimes we might even be like the disciples and fail. If I can flip back to the mountaintop just for a moment, Jesus there talks with Moses and Elijah. And it's interesting that the word that is used is they talk with him about his, we often translate, I don't know about your versions, and I forget what we had here, about his departure that he would achieve in Jerusalem. Do you remember which word it was? Was it departure? it's the same word that we use for Exodus, which takes on a whole new meaning. I mean, it could just be meaning his ensuing death. But when we think of Exodus, we think also about Moses who was there, and the way that Exodus meant a coming out, but everything was about coming out of slavery into the promised land, into freedom from being slaves, making the bricks and building the temples and the pyramids and what. That the word Exodus, that coming out, that departure, is what Moses and Elijah talked to Jesus about on the mountain. Elijah, as you know, is representative of the one. It was told in some of the prophets that Elijah would be the one who would come and turn the people's hearts back to God's covenant. And so Elijah is often linked with the end times, that, when that happens, when Elijah turns all the people's heart back to God and his covenant, then that would be the consummation of all things. That would be heaven, if you like. And so he's linked with those end time kind of ideas. And so in some ways you have Jesus' mission, Jesus' plan for redemption, Jesus' work that he must do in Jerusalem, spanning, the Exodus through to the final things, when it's actually truly won. That's Jesus' mission, and we see him going to Jerusalem with a steely determination, with an amazing kind of courage and dogged determination. And in a sense, as we follow Christ, we're called to be like that. We're called to pursue Jesus' mission of transformation of the whole world, of redeeming the whole world, of reconciling the whole world to God. And sometimes we can be disheartened, sometimes we can feel a little daunted by, such a massive mission that we are part of, that we're caught up in. That we can despair, that we feel like the disciples who can't do the casting out. Well, Jesus can, but when we try it, it doesn't seem to work. When we look at our vision and our mission to this community, the magnitude of it, we look at our budget, and we look at, all the things, all the organisation that requires, we can despair and think, we need a bigger building, and we need more resources, and we need more people, and we need to do more for Christ. We can get overwhelmed by the lack of success. But this story is one of great encouragement. Because even though the disciples have their wonderful moment, even though the disciples saw the transfiguration, we see that they're not always successful, but they were faithful. They were with Jesus, even though they had their moments at the end. Their faithfulness to continuing that journey with Jesus is what forms them through the highs and the lows. And we know that the end of the story is that the lows are not what define the disciples' journey, but it's their successes, it's their dogged determination to keep travelling with Christ, to keep on at Christ's mission. If they had have given up when they failed or when they run away, none of us would be here. The church would have died then and there. But in the back of our minds, we hold that thought we know that they were faithful to Jesus' mission. We know that they were committed and they continued Christ's work even when it did require their own lives and to give their everything. They went on reconciling the world back to God. And that faithfulness requires, all of our mind that undergirds our belief. It requires all of relational faithfulness, that we can be trusting in the community, that we can put our heart and our soul in the people around us and in the people that we reach out to. It requires our behaviour to be transformed as well. That in the doing, in the activity of living that kind of a life, of pursuing that kind of a ministry, it requires, heart and mind and soul and everything we have, all of those aspects. That we would be faithful to Christ's mission that stretches from before the Exodus to the end times, when all the world will be reconciled to God. Let's just come to God in a time of prayer. Loving Lord God, we bring ourselves to you. We ask that you would continue to bring us to the mountaintop, roll back the curtains, and through your Holy Spirit, transform our vision. Transform our understandings. Transform our hope and our beliefs. That as we face the mission field, the Jerusalem that lies before us, wherever our journey takes us, may we know that we walk with Christ at our side. May we know that in our triumphs and in our failures, our goal is to walk with Christ and be faithful to his mission through highs and lows, but the faithfulness is our goal. That is our desire, to walk with Christ day by day, year by year, moment by moment and encounter by encounter. Christ, be with us and work inside of us that our lives might glow, that our ordinary lives might be lit up and glow with a fire that does not come from us, but comes from you. One of the other wonderful images of chariots of fire is when Eric Liddell says, God made me for a purpose, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel God's joy. Now, through that movie, I suggest you go back and watch it again. There are just some images of him running, feeling the joy of God, knowing what it's like to be doing God's thing that he gave him to do. And that is what fires his whole life. That's the glory that God has invited us to live in. May we grab hold of it today and in the coming days. Let's stand and sing our final song, My Lighthouse.